Hello there, it's Jackie here. How are you? I have not been around for a while. I mean, I've been here, haven't gone anywhere. I just haven't been in front of the camera doing videos to send out to you every week. And there's a really great reason, in my opinion, for that. I've had lots of emails and people messaging me just saying, hey, where are you? Are you okay? So I want to give you a little bit of an insight as to what's been going on. Uh, and then I also want to share with you one of the things that I found really worked for me, because it has been a 4 or 5 week period of time of really high intensity stress and of kind of finding myself in trauma state and then finding myself out of it a little bit and just into high intensity stress, then back into trauma and then back out of high intensity stress. So there was one thing in particular that I found myself able to do during that time. And I want to share it with you because it is something that has been in our discussions and has been coming up in people's sessions for quite a long time now. And one of the things that I found was that this thing that popped up for me, and I will share it in a second, this thing that popped up for me, I realized it was never going to pop up for me if I had not built some kind of a relationship to this concept, because I'd started to develop some type of a relationship to it, a habit of doing it more. Then I found that it came up for me. And that taught me another important lesson of practicing. Um, I think we sometimes think that we should turn a switch on and it's something that we want to shift or change into should just be there. And look, sometimes that does happen, but sometimes it's a practice where we literally have to practice being a different way, or we have to practice a different way of looking at things or a different way of responding to things. And that's what I did. And the concept that I'm talking about is this practice of leaning in. So leaning into an experience as opposed to wanting to get away from it. Leaning into the emotion that you're experiencing as opposed to let's just get out of that the fastest way that we can. Or leaning into an experience which could be an illness or a relationship struggle that you're having, or some kind of trauma or high stress, such as I had. So let me jump back just a few seconds and I'll get myself set up. Um, we have two cats in our family, Zeus and Bailey. And Zeus is about 10 years old. Bailey is a few years older than that. She'd be, I don't know, maybe 14, I think. I can't remember off the top of my head. And they've both been very, very robust cats throughout their whole life. And I can count on one hand between the both of them how many times they've been unwell and needed significant veterinary care. Most of the time, any kind of little thing that they've had, I've been able to really successfully help them navigate that just through the use of body talk. Which is the therapy that I practice all with you. So whether that be the body talk access for animals techniques that I use on them for ongoing general maintenance, some little issues that they have, or if they have had significant stuff going on, then I've supported them with body talk sessions. When it seems like they need extra care, then I've given veterinary care. Our other cat, Zeus, he's 10, very, very robust cat, very close to his natural instincts and his natural consciousness. He spends a lot of time outside, comes in, eats, spends time with us, but then he'll be outside, and that's where he is at his happiest, and he's synchronized well with the with the plants and the earth and the seasons and everything like that. So he does very, very well. He on about the 16th of June it was, I noticed that he wasn't too well. I could intuitively feel it, and then I could just subtly see some changes in his face and his expression, the way his head and his ears would sit. I knew something wasn't quite right, but I wasn't sure what it is. And a lot of the times, if he's just feeling off, it usually lasts for about 24 hours. 24 hours later, he had got significantly worse. I did try to go see what was up with him because my daughter Abby had said that she noticed that he was very wet down the front of his chest. But when I went to have a look at him, there were some really loud noises that happen in the environment, and he does not do well with that at all. So he hightailed it and went into trees and bushes that were a fair way away. So I left him there for the day. I had a really full day of clinic that day. And when he came in really quite late that night after I'd finished work, I realized we had a serious situation on our hand. So he was uh, dry reaching a lot, very, very, very uncomfortable, would not eat or drink, which is very unusual for him because he's usually robust and has a very, very good appetite. And he was saturated all down the front. He was just drooling constantly all down the front. To cut a very, very, very long story short, we ended up having to drive him uh, an hour away from where we live to specialist emergency veterinary care that night. He spent the night. They thought that there were things going on with significant heart disease. They also thought that he had issues with kidney disease, all these kinds of things that they first kind of thought that they could see on first inspection. When I finally spoke to them very early the next morning, the real issue became apparent. So this cat, when we got him when he was very, very, very young, and he was only a day or two away from dying. He was extremely anemic. He was infested with parasites, namely um, fleas, and had my son not got him from where he was living and taken him to the vet, and the vet gave him a treatment and a wash to get all the fleas off him, the vet said he probably likely would have died within 24 hours later. So he kind of started off needing a bit of extra help and support. And we were aware from a very early age that he had a funny breathing and respiratory rate. He had a little bit of a murmur that was detected, and he had low hemoglobin levels. So we really supported him in whatever ways that we could to get all of those up and as well balanced as we possibly could. What we found out was that he had a huge hole in his diaphragm, and he's a Persian breed of cat. The diaphragm and the pericardium, which is the sac, the protective sac that the heart sits in Persian breeds, they're actually fused, and that's one thing that I learned. In us and in other breeds of animals and cats, they're not, they're separate. So the heart and the pericardium sits like that up in the chest, and the diaphragm sits underneath and keeps everything in the abdominal cavity separate from what's up in the above the diaphragm in the top. And not only did he have a hole in that diaphragm, but the hole went through to the pericardium. And it would seem to be that he had a small hole. We don't know how small, but he had a small hole from birth, and that over time, as he's got bigger, it's got bigger. And it was eventually found when he had to have surgery that for quite a long time, part of his liver had been up in that hole and in the heart space, because he has quite a lot of scarring and deformity of his liver. There must have been something that happened to him, some kind of trauma, whether he was running and he jumped and it caused this hole to become bigger. What they found was that a large part of his liver and nearly all of the intestines were actually up and invading into the heart space and the pericardium. And he needed urgent surgery, otherwise, he just wasn't going to make it. So I ended up, for those of you that were booked in over that week or two, you'll know that I had to reschedule you because it was a matter of driving down to this specialist veterinary centre and back quite a bit. I had to find a surgeon that was willing to do the surgery very quickly. I did. Thank you, Dr. Sebastian. You're wonderful. And I had to transport him from one vet to another. He then had the surgery. The surgery seemed to go well. We then brought him back a few days later. He had a very severe reaction to one of the medications, and I'm giving you the very, very condensed version of this experience. He had a very bad reaction to one of the medications, it would seem, which we weren't aware of when we picked him up. It just became evident when he was let out of the cat carrier. It was almost like he was out of his mind. I was questioning whether he'd had a stroke from the surgery. He was lunging himself at walls and smashing into walls, and it subsequently opened up his surgical wound, and the inside surgical suture lines started to break down, and his sternum popped out through his surgical wound. And it was extremely traumatic for myself and Abby, and quite difficult to see that and experience an animal going through that kind of pain. For those of you that have known me well and worked with me for a long time, you'll know that one of the reasons why I started being drawn to and working in integrative healthcare was primarily to work with animals. I actually didn't want to work with people at all. That changed quite quickly for me for various reasons, but that's the reason why I got in. I've had a very deep relationship with the animal kingdom since I can remember. So for some reason, traumas around animals and seeing animals in states of distress or pain really affects me quite deeply. And I'm still I'm still working through unpacking it all. Really using those abilities of hindsight to be able to look into the experience that we've just had over the last few months to get a deeper understanding of what drives this. Because when this happens with our animals, the fight flight system, that sympathetic system, just kicks in and absolutely takes over, and you don't have any say in the matter. It's an automatic process and you're just along for the drive. And I found that happened a lot. Depending on what was going on for me, it happened a lot. So for those of you that have had similar experiences where your sympathetic nervous system does kick in and you go into fight or flight, or you go into some kind of freezing mode before you decide you want to fight or run away, then you'll understand what that's like. It is a very automatic process. You don't get the opportunity to have much say over that. There's no logical thinking process that's available at that time when you're experiencing that. We ended up having to take him back into emergency care here where we live. And we found out that his surgical wound, the stitches were placed quite far apart because they needed to do what they call a quick close. And the reason for that is because his heart went into a very high rhythm after they extracted the liver and the intestines. And that was always a question whether that was going to happen. Because there's a chance that the heart can arrest at that time, what they do is they try to close them up very quickly so that it's a way to be able to calm the entire body down and let it rest. Well, because he had this reaction and he was in a lot of pain, this all opened again and he needed to go back under general anaesthetic. They had to flush it all out. They then resutured it and they stapled the surgical wound closed. We then had to leave him in there for a few days. During that time, when we brought him home, our other cat started sneezing a lot. And I initially wondered, maybe she's got a grass seed or something like that, and it's the body's way of trying to clear it. It became really evident there was something else going on, massive upper respiratory infection. And we ended up having to take her to the vet twice. Now, during this time, I must say, I have an extraordinary amount of wonderful colleagues that I can reach out to when something is really hitting the fan big time. And I can reach out to them and say, hey, this is going on. Can you see whether it's a priority to do a session or not? And they will, when they have the time, do a session, whether it be for the animal or the whole family matrix. One of the things that we talk about when I'm doing sessions for animals, especially animals in a family situation, is that animals very, very much mirror what's going on within the family matrix, whether it be for individual members of the family or the family matrix as a whole. They'll very much mirror that in their behaviors, in what happens to their body, and what they will then manifest as illnesses and imbalances and disease processes, as a way of being able to mirror and help release that from the family matrix. So when our other cat, Bailey, developed this really severe respiratory infection, and it got so bad that she couldn't breathe through her nose at all. So for any of you that understand about cats, you'll know that they're not a mouth breather. Cats do not breathe through their mouths, and it's not normal for them. And if they can't breathe through their nose, it means they can't smell their food. And it's very important for them to be able to smell their food, because they need to be able to smell the amino acids and other things in them to know whether the food is right for them or not. They then also stop drinking water, and that's what happened to her. And the biggest issue around that is dehydration more than anything at all. When she developed this really, really severe respiratory infection, I knew that was very much a mirrored process for the grief and the stress and the sadness that we have been experiencing in our family matrix in our home. Both Abby and I had experienced it in different ways with what we'd been going through with our other cat. And so it was very, very interesting, because the lungs are designed to actually help us process grief and sadness. And if there is a lot, and if there is, for whatever reason, an inability or a struggle for that person's body-mind complex to be able to process and move through that and release it, then it either will find a way to be able to do that at some point in time, and or an animal in the family will take it on and will manifest it, and it will come up as things like that, as massive respiratory illness. So she ended up having to stay in hospital. She had general anaesthetic. She was scoped and tubed to see if there were any foreign bodies. She was put, and they didn't find any. They actually couldn't find a reason for it. And she was sent home with antibiotics, and she had regular access done on her daily, and she had a few body talk sessions, of which she's fully recovered now. So we had both cats in the same veterinary centre at the same time, and we brought them home at exactly the same time. Our other cat that had the diaphragm repair, he was not allowed to move or stretch or jump in any way, shape or form. Now for a cat, that is almost impossible. So we had to keep him enclosed, heavily enclosed. And for a cat that's very, very close to his instincts, and he spends an enormous amount of time in nature, living according to the cycles of the day and the cycles of the season, this was a massive stressor for him, huge. He was unhappy 24 hours of the day, and he let everyone know that he was very, very unhappy. Now, despite all of our best efforts to do body talk for that, what you're trying to body talk out of him to get him to calm down is his instincts. You're trying to stop him from being close to his instinctual nature. And we can't do that. We can't body talk instincts out of an animal or out of a human being. We can't do that. So we're just trying to support him as best we can with the circumstances that we've got. And we had him in confinement, almost like we changed the way that it was set up a few times, but eventually we moved him into like a puppy play pen, which made it a tiny bit easier, but he still was unhappy. So he was in confinement basically for a period of about 3 or 4 weeks. And that was a lot of sleepless nights, maybe getting 2 hours maximum a night. And then we had to have him, when we were eventually allowed to let him out of that, we had to keep him in the house confined for at least a period of 1 or 2 weeks before he was eventually let outside. Now he has to come in early of an afternoon and he's kept into it tomorrow morning, which he doesn't like at all. So it's been a very interesting journey. The way that I could only explain it in that moment was that, or in those moments through those weeks, was it felt like a bomb had gone off in our family matrix, and one that I wasn't prepared for. And because, for whatever reason, it's one of the major triggers that I have in my life is seeing animals in great distress, is meant that then there were many times where my body would go into an instant automatic full fight flight process. And that is maximum stress. It is also maximum contraction. So in that moment when you know that you're scared, but don't have the ability to really logically connect with that process and and to be able to view yourself from an outside perspective. So to be able to view yourself in the situation as the observer, you're purely just in absolute fear and terror sometimes, and you're just holding on for dear life. And because of my many experiences with clients and in classes and in the My Incredible Orbit community, talking about this process of leaning in, right? Leaning into an experience or leaning into an emotion that you're having. Because we've talked about that so much, that popped up for me. It was the first time ever in a highly traumatic response process that had popped up for me. And I realized later when I was reviewing the entire experience that, as I said earlier, had I not started to build a relationship with doing that and a strong habit, it wouldn't have popped up for me. I would have still stayed in many of those cases in a highly traumatic expression and in maximum contracted fear. So this is a process that I had. I was driving down to the coast to where he was at the veterinary centre, and I was then going to be responsible for transporting him from one vet to another vet to have the surgery. And that had really triggered me, really triggered me, taking a cat that was listed as critically ill, who was sedated, who you had to handle with kit gloves. I didn't even know what exactly I was scared of. That's how unconscious this trigger process is. But I just knew that I was absolutely terrified. And on the way down, I was, my consciousness gave me this few nanoseconds of time to be able to step outside myself and look at myself as the observer, and to be able to ask myself, what would happen if you just lent into the fear right now? And that started off a chain of realizations and awarenesses for me. Oh, I haven't lent into fear. I'm in full fear. I'm in absolute contracted fear. But in that moment, what you're doing and what I was doing is you try to get away from the fear. We're taught that it is such an uncomfortable experience, that it is such a thing that you don't want to be. That's what we're taught. You don't want to be in that, so you want to get away from it. And you don't realize it, but it's actually trying to pull you into it so that you can experience it innately. And what we're trying to do, because we've been taught to do that, is pull away from it and move away from it. Well, doing that prolongs the experience, it intensifies the experience, and you don't move through it. So then it accumulates in the body mind complex, and at some point in time it just keeps coming back to be readdressed and readdressed and readdressed, and oftentimes it adds with other stresses and traumas and will then manifest as illnesses and diseases. So I had this opportunity in these few seconds to allow myself to lean in. Like, there's so many times that we'd talked about it, I really got to experience this in the most maximum way possible. And so that's what I did. I actually saw the fear, I faced the fear, and I lent into it. And the moment I lent into it, everything changed, everything relaxed. I was okay with fear because I was a fear. I was like, okay, I'm scared. Okay, I'm scared. So it's okay to be this emotional expression right now. That's okay. It completely changed the entire experience. It completely changed the way that I was looking at things. And I noticed that the nervous system started to come down. I noticed that I felt clearer, more calmer, and I was then able to step into other dialogues with myself, such as you have no control how this is going to work out. Everything that is going to happen will happen, and you have no control over that. You are doing and providing everything you possibly can, and that's all that you need to do. So let go of the outcome, let go of whatever you think is going to happen, because you have no control. That was one of the dialogues I was able to have with myself. That also very much helped. The other dialogue that I was able to have with myself, and I was able to do this from the perspective of, because I was now the observer, and I was able to view things a lot differently, rather than just purely hanging on for dear life right in that second, and then hanging on for dear life in this second, and hanging on, right? So then the other one that I did was, and these weren't ones that I was trying to do. I wasn't trying to steer this. I wasn't, what can I tell myself to make this better? These are all just natural kind of stepping stones that came up for me. So after you don't have any control of this outcome. You're just doing the best you can, and it's going to be whatever it's going to be. My next step that I took was, you know what? You have been through some really traumatic experiences in your life, and not only did you survive those, but you thrived those, because you became so much stronger from those experiences. And now it's that strength that actually stands you in good stead right now. So rely on that strength. Remember what you've been through. You've kind of got this kind of thing. And I found that those things made the world of difference to me. So the current process for me is, I am in a process of still reflecting on what that whole experience was for me, for us, so that I can understand what those triggers are. There was an incident that happened early last week, I think it was, where Zeus came in late of an afternoon, and there is a big tomcat in the area that has been coming up around where we live because the young cat that lives beside us has just recently gone into season. And I knew by her being in season, and she runs all over the place and comes to our house a lot, I knew that it would attract tomcats. So he is not at the top of his game. He has lost a lot of his fur through the surgery. That has an impact on your immune system, your wei qi, a few other things. So I know he's not as robust as what he was prior to this happening. When he came into the house, he was in a bad state. He had a lot of pain in his head. He was bleeding deep down into the ear. And that whole experience that he was going through triggered me again, but this time it was in a even more deeply profound way, where my entire body started responding in different ways than it has even previously to that. So it's still very much a process I'm unpacking. This is where I become very, very grateful for the work that I do, because the way that our innate wisdom is able to guide the sessions that we have, it's able to show what sits in areas of our consciousness or in areas of our generational background or our epigenetics or in our past life stuff that would be contributing to these reactions and triggers that we have. And trying to find out what that is on your own, you've only got a certain amount of rope that you've got access to be able to do that. That's the honest truth, because we're trying to pull things apart and decipher it from the purely the perspective of the conscious mind. And if you're lucky, you've got good intuitive capabilities as well. That will take you a certain way. But that there is so much information that sits in other areas or levels of the consciousness that you don't consciously have access to. And that's where therapy such as talk therapy can be fantastic, but it massively has its limitations, because it doesn't really allow you to be able to go to those other levels of consciousness to be able to find out what is the reason for that triggering? Where does that come from? What are all the pieces of the puzzle to that? Because unless I can unpack that, it's just going to be a recurring thing for me. It'll keep doing that, and I don't want that. I'm ready to move past that. So I will use both the tools that I've got. I will enlist the help of some other colleagues who are professionals in other modalities who I trust, and I will be using body talk to actually really work through this to understand where does it come from, so that I can have a very different experience of reality and a very different experience of myself, my body, when the next time comes that an animal is, critically unwell. So I can navigate that very, very differently. With the therapy that we do, body talk, it allows us, the innate wisdom allows us to be able to go anywhere in the body mind complex, to be able to start pulling forward the pieces of information that really relate to that. And it's such a gentle but highly effective way of being able to do it. And I am just so grateful that we have access to this, to be able to do this. So my wrap up from that is, it's still a process I'm working through. There's still some triggers that come up from that, absolutely. We have basically a bush cat, a bush cat that is confined in the house from early afternoon into the early morning, and he is not happy, which means I am not getting much sleep right now, and you may notice that on my body or in my energy, and I'm still working out how we can remedy that. I'm hoping to be able to give him some body talk where it supports him in being able to settle down through the night. Um, I'm back to full clinical practice. So you'll be able to get me no problems at all. And if there's one thing that I could recommend as a takeaway from this is learning to lean in and really developing a relationship with that. Every single day, we are given some opportunity to lean in, right? The moment you start observing things more, you'll begin to realize what you resist or what you pull away from or what you try to ignore, what bothers you. They're the things to lean into, especially the uncomfortable emotions like fear or worry or concern or anger. Lean in, be with it, and see what comes from that. Okay. If you have any comments, any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you have any of your own takeaways from this, from me sharing my experience, then please pop it into the comments. And as I journey along with this, if I have any realizations from what is, part of this and really triggers me that I feel like would be beneficial for you, then I absolutely will share that as well. All right. Don't forget to um, subscribe before you leave. I would love that. That would help me out a lot. And hit the notification button so it just lets you know when I release another video, which might be one that you like. And you can always find me over on jackiemcintyre.com. Okay. Look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye.